Thanks for tuning in to another episode of What Would Ralph Say, the podcast. The most asked question of professionals that have been philosophers or, New Age psychology or whatever you want to call it, would ask questions about happiness. We live in a world where that seems to be a really tough commodity to find. Really, because there's just so much negativity that at times we get overwhelmed with the news, with the information, with all the things going on in the world, and we go, my God, will I ever be happy? Will we ever find happiness? Does it even exist? Can we find it at all? Well, I think what Ralph would say is really good, and I'll tell you why. And this is one of my favorite essays. He wrote an essay on it, but it doesn't say how to be happy. That's kind of modern, I guess. He says, or writes it on the law of compensation. And I love that law. It's wonderful. What does he say? He says, for everything you've lost, you gain something else. And for everything you gain, you lose something else. That's the way it works. It's a law. It's a spiritual truth. It's something that never fails. And that is so reliable. It's so good to know that if I want to be happy, I really need to put this law of compensation real close up here. So every time something happens, I can remember for everything I lose, I gain something else. And for everything I gain, I lose something else. And for everything I lose, I gain something else repeated. I'll tell you what, he even points it out in this essay about Mother Nature and how she handles this. But how many times have you heard somebody say, oh God, I lost that job. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Or I ended this relationship, which is really, at the time, devastating. And as I look back on it, I realize it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I'll tell you what, he goes into Mother Nature and explains it this way. If you look at a duck or an eagle flying in the air, they're very different. They're very different species. And the duck, when you look at it, has little short wings, cute little short wings, and a beak that's flat. If you look at the eagle, their wings go way out and their nose is kind of hooked. That beak goes around. It's actually a hook that it uses to peck at things. Now, I lived near Lincoln Park in downtown Chicago. And they had ponds there, lagoons, ponds, different things like that, with walkways they were like wooden raised sidewalks. It was really nice. And you could go watch the ducks. Well, the kids loved it. There's always thousands of children, not thousands, but many children watching the ducks. And if you ever watch a duck swim, you can see their feet are going 100 miles an hour, and yet their body is very calm. There's no ripples. It just moves very slowly. The feet are going like crazy. And then once in a while, it takes a deep dive and its head goes all the way to the bottom of the pond. Why? Because there's all sorts of nutrients and goodies and plants and things that the duck can live on the bottom of that pond, on the bottom of any lake. It cannot do what the eagle does. The eagle has those wide rings, and the eagle can sail under the wind going underneath its wings, to keep it flying, keep it suspended in the air, moving slowly as it goes. It can go for miles. I read it can go 100 miles on one wing span. The duck can't do that, but it's compensated with the beak that's flat and the ability to swim and observe very slowly, even though its feet are going like crazy, what's available to it. The ego must be in the air. And guess what the compensation point of the ego is? The wide wings, yes, but incredible eyesight. Incredible ability even to see a mouse move through grass. And if you've ever watched an eagle It dives way fast, way down, and gets the mouse with that hook. So the compensation for the ego is big wings, a crooked nose, if you will, a hook on its nose to obtain what it needs to live. The law of compensation was beautifully illustrated in nature, not only with those two creatures, but with everything. You see the law of action, or the law of compensation in action. So it is with us. Watching nature, we usually learn. And what we learn from that is, even though you lost the job, the relationship ended, the family reunion was a disaster, you hate your new boss, whatever the unhappiness is, whatever the uneasiness is, it can be compensated for. But guess what? We're the ones that need to know. Unlike the duck or the ego, they don't need to know. They just need to follow their instinctual behavior and thus survive. For us, in order to be happy, we need to come to the philosophy of the law of compensation. This is what Ralph Waldo Emerson is recommending, without ever having read Freud or Carl Jung or any of the more modern philosophers and therapists and psychologists that are telling us how to be happy. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, yes, there is a spiritual law. You can use it, and you probably already have by even listening to somebody. And again, I'll repeat, when I lost my job, I was frightened to death. I didn't know how I'd live, how I'd get a paycheck, how I'd pay the rent. However, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Or you'll hear people say ending a relationship, which is never easy, no matter what relationship it is. When the relationship ends, if we state in our mind the law of compensation, this too will be resolved by knowing that there is an answer, by knowing that, like the duck, we're going to get the nutrients of the ground by ending the relationship. We got to dive deep, go under the water, and it's not comfortable maybe for a few seconds. However, in the law of compensation, it comes full circle. It comes about. You are compensated for whatever happens in that moment. And you've all heard people say that 100 times. It's the best thing that ever happened. At the time, I couldn't believe it was happening to me. And now I know it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Sometimes that even is true with people that have health challenges. They'll go, my body was talking to me. My body was telling me not to do this anymore. My body was telling me that I'm too stressed out. My body is telling me not to sit in this chair anymore. My body's telling me not to eat those potato chips, even though they're the most wonderful thing on earth. I love potato chips. But maybe your body is saying, don't, or do. Because guess what? In exercising, what happens an hour later? You're sore. You hurt. I do yoga. And after the class, immediately after the class, on the way home in the car, I will start to feel pain in my muscles. The law of compensation is in action. It is stretching my muscles even after I leave the yoga class, because I'm being compensated for the short-term difficulty or stress or pain or stretching, going beyond my limits, whatever it is that I'm doing in that yoga class. It's happening for my greater good, because the law of compensation. Even our body's muscles react and have the law of compensation for us as we sit in our car and drive if we've gone to yoga. Ask the duck, ask the ego. Don't ask the mouse that got caught. I'm sure he's not happy. Ask the nutrients at the bottom of that pond. Ask your muscles. Ask a friend who went through a rather painful divorce how she or he feels a couple years later. And if they're happy, they've made peace with it through the law of compensation. It's really a wonderful, wonderful law. And it's so easy to see it in nature. So many times you'll see trees even grow with the law of compensation. the fir trees of the north, the white birch of the snow country, certainly the sequoias and the redwoods of California. You see how their tallness, how their greatness has made them exist. The only thing that ever destroyed them was us cutting them down. Nothing we could do about that. However, in our own personal lives, compensation will work. Know it, absorb it, study it, accept it, and enjoy it. So what would Ralph say about happiness? He would say exactly that. You compensate yourself, no matter what the circumstances, in happiness by being happy, by realizing that no situation is forever, that everyone and everything has a timeline. Or as it says religiously, or in the Bible, or in the Quran, or whatever, the book of Buddha, whatever you read, whatever spiritual intelligence or philosophy you are in, you can find the law of compensation is always right there. In the Bible, I think it says, this too shall pass. In Buddha says you can't hide the moon, you can't hide the sun, and you can't hide the truth. And the truth is, this too shall pass. That you will be compensated for any loss that's experienced. However, the other side of that equation is for anything you've gained. You have the opportunity to either immediately put the law of compensation into action. If you've gained money, by giving some of it, not all of it, by giving some of it away, you already are feeling happy about what's happening because you gave money. If you really want this to be in action, just go to a dog shelter, walk through, and give them $10. You're going to feel so good about that. If you've got the money, if you received the money somehow, you gave it. Therefore, you've compensated for what you've been given. Very important. To stay happy is to exercise these laws carefully and fully. The law of compensation. If you lose something, don't throw your hands up and say it's the end of the world. Go. For everything I lost, I'll gain something else. If I have to go watch a duck at the pond, I'll do that. The other thing is, for everything you've gained, you lose something else. If you gain, even at work, if you are promoted, you have gained something. You have the opportunity to go and work with, continue working with, continue knowing the people that you worked with before you had the raise or before you got the promotion. Go back to your roots, sit with it, and know you have gained something. And for everything you've gained, you got to give something up. You're getting more responsibility. Yes, you're getting more money. That's the compensation. You're going to be watched closer. You're going to have to leave some of the acquaintances maybe you knew in your old office behind and meet new ones. It's not easy to meet new people. However, you've gained something. So therefore, not only will you lose something else, you must. That's the way it works. It is a full circle law. And he writes beautifully on how to do it. He writes beautifully on relationships and nature and business transactions and friendships and, of course, marriages. For everything you've gained in a marriage, you lose something else. For everything you've lost in a marriage, you gain something else. When we know that, we can relax, the shoulders can go down, and happiness appears. You see, happiness happens. If you chase it, it runs away. It automatically comes to us when our shoulders are down and we're ready to receive it. That is the beauty of his philosophy. That is the truth of what he has to say about happiness. And you know, by listening to this, it's true. There's nothing complicated, nothing hidden, no secret messages. There's nothing that you have to do, no food you have to eat. You don't have to sleep in a certain way. You don't have to do anything. You just have to know it exists. And when you know it exists, then the circumstances of your life become knowable. And when you know something, when you have knowledge of something, fear disappears. And when that shadow goes, the happiness moves in. Remember, for everything you gain, you lose something. And for everything you lose, you gain something. I can't wait to hear how that law of compensation has worked for you.